Hey, welcome. Hello. Thank you for clicking. My name's Kevin. I had a conversation with Rae Randall the other day. I think I think I stumbled across Claire purely by algorithmic chance several months ago at this point. I happened across a video where she was she was doing a video podcast where she was discussing her latest book, which is called The War on Gender. I found her takes very interesting, nuanced, and refreshing. So I reached out. We've been kind of private chatting on and off for several months at this point. Claire has an honours degree in philosophy and psychology from the University of Leeds. She also has a graduate diploma in art therapy. She's worked in psychiatry, mental health, and personal development, and has taught psychology and further education. Um, from my conversation with Claire, I think further education is kind of an area of passion for her. The sheer breadth of, her interests kind of shine through in conversation. She doesn't disappoint at all. Um, Claire transitioned, I think, in the mid to late 70s, so has been around in trans spaces to kind of witness the change over time. And is very concerned about the areas that she's seen it heading in recent years, which is one of the reasons that she wrote the War on Gender. Um, we kind of had a generalized chat. I haven't actually had a chance to read the book as yet. So this is just a general introductory kind of conversation. We kind of talk about a little bit about the things that are in her book, and we also talk about our mutual disappointment in some of the things that were left out of Helen Joyce's book, and it's just a general conversation from there. You can find all of the information that you need to locate Claire's blog or YouTube page, or how to follow her in the description below. Yeah, I had a great time. I hope you enjoy too. Cheers.
Thanks ever so much, Kev, for all your patience.
No, you're fine.
Um,
I've been as flittery as you, so it's worked out perfectly actually. Because
yeah.
I only just finished reading the book like a week and a half ago. Um,
Uh,
because it kept being, I I was really, I don't know how into the social media thing you've been and for how long, but when Helen Joyce first
oh,
popped up
yeah.
and announced her book and started doing the literary kind of interview circuit, but before the book was released, I was really, really impressed with her, and I was really hopeful. And then as soon as the book got released, she seemed to change her tone
Interesting.
quite a
Yeah.
lot. Like before the book got released, it was all about nuance and being
Yeah. Yeah.
open-minded and being able to sort the wheat from the chaff. And then as soon as
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
released the book, it like the whole dynamic just changed. And
Interesting. Yeah.
I bought the book and started kind of reading it, and I just couldn't get past the first chapter because it was just so disappointing. Like just the whole
Yeah.
tone
Yeah.
of, I started looking at your review.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, even the title is like it just screams confirmation bias from the beginning. So it's really taken me
Absolutely. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
long time to get through. But I mean, there is
Uh,
stuff that I
I had
agree with.
such difficulty with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was very interested to see your take because I think we share a few things. Like I read Abigail Schreier's book first up, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
that was beautiful. Like I really liked that
It's
book.
good, isn't it? Yeah.
I didn't agree with everything, but she made it very clear that she was being as impartial as she possibly could, like probably too impartial
Mm,
in some places. And
yes.
the juxtaposition between that and this is just night and day. So yeah, I've been very interested to read your blogs about what your take on it is.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm really so pleased that I'm getting some feedback because there is. I've just written a new blog that's kind of in the. I'm just in. Um, I've called it the wall of silence,
Oh wow.
because that's what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Um, I've approached several outlets that have made strong, you know, claims about this, and offered them interviews, review copy of my book, The Guardian, The Conservative Woman in England. There's an independent blogger called John Waters who is quite into the kind of alternative media network, and they just don't even reply.
Oh
I don't
wow.
even get an acknowledgement. Not a single, I'd like to discuss this with you. Please take my, I'd be happy to recommend you to my publisher for a review copy. Please let me know what you think about this. I have a nuanced view which doesn't agree with either side of the extremes. No,
Yeah.
silence, complete silence.
Yeah,
Extraordinary,
I've had
really.
a very similar kind of well, obviously I'm not going to write a book or anything, but if you if you disagree with both sides, like I'm kind of more on the GC side. I kind of think this progressive
Yeah,
politics, like there's definitely a
yeah.
problem, but if you
Mm-hmm.
have any criticism of the gender critical side, then you're a like you're a trans rights activist. Whether
Yes,
you
yeah,
are or
yeah,
not,
yeah,
you are. And if you
yeah,
are in any way critical of the trans stuff, then you're automatically a TERF. So you've kind of pissed
yeah,
both sides
yeah,
off. So there's no platform whatsoever
yeah,
for you to
yeah.
speak. And yet, I kind of have found a group of trans people, even really young trans people that are in their early 20s, late teens, that are transitioned or transitioning, um, that actually we share, there's so much overlap. Like most of the transsexual,
Mhm.
or even a lot of the transgendered people that I'm interacting with are not really woke at all. They're not down for
Good, good.
all of either side. They have nuanced takes.
Mm,
Yeah, so
mm.
it's been very interesting because even most trans people that I know don't fall into either category. They're kind of somewhere in the middle. Like they're like, no, I'm not into this woke stuff, but
Mm, mm,
like the GC stuff can be a bit too far in places as well because
yeah, yeah.
clearly there's something, clearly trans is kind of, it exists at the very
It
least.
exists,
A
exactly.
thing.
Yeah. Well, it seems to have been, we seem to have quite recently gone into, like you mentioned about Helen Joyce, kind of ramping it up when her book came out and the promotion that she did after the early, outlet. And I think we've actually recently moved into another higher
Yeah,
gear than even that.
yeah,
Um, because, for instance, Helen Joyce was into this thing. You might have seen a bit of her discussion with Jordan Peterson.
yeah. I saw the whole thing basically, apart from the Daily Wire bit.
I only watched a few bits of it because it was so extreme. I'm now, that I took a fairly soft view on Jordan Peterson because, I was writing the book back in the period 17, 18, 19,
Yeah,
when he was open-minded about this. But when he was talking with Helen Joyce, I was very concerned about they were taking the attitude now that even people who have benefited from transition and medical treatment are should be prevented from doing this. I don't know what they do with people like you and me,
yeah,
but that it should be prevented from happening because it sets a bad example to other people who might or might not be, having some feelings about this. And I thought that is quite an extreme
yeah.
authoritarian view, really, isn't it? But now it seems to have gone to an even higher level than that. I don't know if you've seen the stuff that's been going around. There's a woman called Jennifer Bilek. Yeah, she's been around for a while. You know, people inhabit sort of various backwaters on the internet, and then you come across them, and suddenly you're, you
Yeah.
know, in that stream, and it's complete full on abuse. There's no Helen Joyce will at least make the pretense of some discussion or debate. You know, she throws these odd words in, you know, compassionate and so on and so forth. But you know, Jennifer Bilek is really
She's
not making any pretenses at all.
I actually saw your tweets with I think you were you tweeting with her the other day?
I was, yeah.
I almost tweeted it
Oh,
at
well,
you going, no, no, walk away. Like
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
Well, I've been through. Go on.
she's been around for almost as long no, she's been around for longer than I have in this debate,
Oh,
but
really?
I bumped into
Yeah.
her very early on. There was another woman that was on YouTube that was they were kind of like twinsies almost, like they had a very similar view.
Ah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, so I kind of bumped into that stuff early. I kind of wonder though, because the people that speak about there are a few things, and I bump into this regularly. So you and I talk about trans from our perspective and what it is
Mm.
to us. Um,
Yes, I think I can see where you're going with this. Carry on, yeah.
and if we live in like we have our experiences of the being in the trans community and you know mingling with lots of other trans people over an
Yeah,
extended period of time, so we kind of
yeah,
know what goes on behind like what goes on. But there are
yeah,
a whole heap of people that like Helen Joyce and you know Billick and a lot of others that their attention wasn't really drawn to this until it was well past crazy, like until you
yeah,
know
yeah.
massively
Absolutely, absolutely.
transitioners and people with pink hair crying about pronouns and you know like just doing
Yeah,
crazy things.
yeah,
um
yeah.
so for them trans isn't really you and me, and sometimes they'll talk
No,
about
no.
nuance and compassion and kind of pay lip service or give us a nod,
Mm,
but they also talk about this subject so often
mm,
in and out every day, look like pretty much every day. Like Helen Joyce went from working at The Economist, being an editor at The Economist, to working for Sex
yeah,
Matters. This is now her bread and butter. And the more
yeah.
you talk about stuff, the more you speak in shorthand, and you kind of just assume that people understand where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
so I kind of think that maybe there's a little bit of miscommunication coming along
Yeah,
with that as well, because
yeah.
I interact with a lot of GC, women or
Mm-hmm,
feminists, and they will
mm-hmm,
when they're public facing, they will say things like similar to Helen Joyce, similar to the sorts of things that Helen Joyce
mm,
says, and they agree with her.
mm.
And then when they're talking to you in private, they like if you kind of broach the subject with them, they can kind of seem a bit shocked, as in, oh no, I didn't mean you. Like, no, no, no. Like
Yes, yeah,
transsexuals are a different thing altogether. It's almost like
yeah.
they kind of are assuming that we know that they're not talking about us, but even though it's not always really clear. So there's a lot of, and then there are
Yes, yeah.
other people that are saying exactly the same sorts of things that do mean us as well. So it's hard to,
Yes, yes.
it can be very hard to know which is which until you start scratching
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. I have found a few people on Twitter who you know, have like, you know, turfy turf and so on as their handles, and I have had one or two of them say that kind of thing to me. Oh no, well you're all right, Claire, you know, we're not talking about you, you know. Or even one or two have kind of you know, tweeted me and said, you know, that I'm kind of you know, the kind of person that they should be kind of listening to. But at the same time, then they kind of often tend to bracket me with there are some kind of, I don't quite understand this position, but there are some moderately high profile trans women in Britain who um, are quite happy, you know, they pass as women, they've had all the treatment and everything, but they say, oh no, well of course, you know, we're just men playing the, you know, the, what is it, the the autogynephilia thing, and I think, well, no, I don't want to be associated with that either, you know. So it is very much, as you say, largely a matter of unfamiliarity with the terms and divisions. And as I say in my book, I mean, we need a better taxonomy of this.
Oh yeah,
really.
yeah, like a better understanding. I was chatting to a trans woman here from Australia that was talking about, well, you know, like do the old, like does AGP and HSTS, like do those categories, are they as relevant as they used to be? Now there's ROGD as well. Like has as time has gone on and trans has kind of become more integrated in some ways into people's understanding of the world, like have the categories expanded, like that there is a lot of research that has I'm always shocked by how much research there has been done because I never really paid any attention to it,
Mm,
but there
mm,
still hasn't really been enough. Like I've been
mm,
transitioned
mm.
for 23 years this year, and I don't think I've ever even interacted with someone who was a part of a study, which is kind of really
No,
something
no,
about it.
no. And I would say that this is one of my really big criticisms of Helen Joyce's book, is that unless I blinked and missed it, she had no actual conversations with any trans women. I mean, she cherry picks the most absurd kind of examples of, you know, behavior
Yeah,
to use as examples of what we're all like, and it's quite absurd. I mean, I'm kind of left speechless with it, really. And
yeah,
I do think that it must be, it does go beyond, I think, what we were talking about a minute ago. I mean, there are a lot out there who have only become familiar with the subject in the last, year or two, who you can excuse for not really understanding the taxonomy and the differences and the internal divisions, that we're experiencing. But then there are people like Helen Joyce who, I mean, as I say in my blog, I mean, her whole presentation claims to be, this is definitive. This is definitive. I'm telling you what you need to know. This is everything. And yet not a single direct interview that I could. It's very similar, actually, to Janice Raymond's book
oh,
from the early 80s. Are you
I,
familiar with that?
I'm familiar with it. I've only heard I kind of listened to a reading of the first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny because I was kind of slightly terrified by the existence of that for some reason. I have no idea why.
Well,
But I was kind of like, I don't want to know what's in it. Like it must be monstrous.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like, oh
yeah,
no, oh, no, I'll just give it a wide berth and it won't bother
yeah,
me and I won't bother it and we'll both be fine.
yeah, yeah,
And then there was a feminist reading space on Twitter about it, and I jumped into it, and it just is like it's not even veiled confirmation bias. It's just
yeah, yeah,
blatant neon flashing lights. I
yeah,
don't like trans people. This is what they must be. Like, I have decided
yeah,
before I explored anything, I had decided I didn't like them. So I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you don't like them as well. Like, I'm just going to present
yeah. That's right.
everything
Yeah,
bad. And it's like, oh, okay, well, why firstly I was like, why did I think this book would be any different than this? I've been around for long enough, I should
yeah,
know by now.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, it was kind of shocking. I think
That that's where the phrase "morally mandated out of existence" comes from.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it may have been the first chapter and a half, I don't know, but it was enough to know that I didn't need to worry about uh her
Yeah,
anymore. Like, but yeah, I kind of I suppose I kind of give there are things like I kind of agree with the rapid onset thing. Like, there's clearly something going on. I don't think it's the only thing that's happening. So there are bits in like there are themes of Helen Joyce's book that I agree with, and I'm glad she wrote it. I am very disappointed in the way she went about it, because she's also made very
yeah,
clear since she published it that she's also well aware of the Kate Millett and the influence that the feminists had moved like back all the way back to the 70s, 1970s.
uh-huh,
Was
yeah,
published, how influential that book was in how we got here, and she
yeah,
just bypassed that completely. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
also think tactically she kind of had to do that if she wanted to gather any kind of audience. So I'm not sure I put them in the same category. Janice Raymond and Helen Joyce are. I I think I would cut Helen Joyce a bit more slack than Janice Raymond. Is that
It's
transsexual?
a bit more subtle, I think, isn't it? It's a bit more subtle. I started out like you with high kind of expectations of it, particularly since the chap I borrowed, the copy I read off, said good things about it. And I think he was, looking at things like the ROGD and the ideology and the promotion and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think he was, kind of seeing under the bonnet of where this is going for, um, for us lot. And it's this whole kind of sidling away from the issue that the problem exists.
Mm.
They always say this, brief little thing about, oh well, there are a few people, but then it's right on, and then we don't exist. And
Yeah.
I did one thing that a friend of mine said about Helen Joyce, not from having read the book, but from having seen some videos of her, which said that, and I would say this virtually from just a 5-second view of her expression when you watch her on a video, is that what she's projecting onto me is that she hates men. So anybody who she can categorize in that is, going to be conflated with that. And there's very, you'll have noticed in my the blog pieces I've written, and I've got plenty more to say, that her reasoning is extremely flimsy. I think it's what I would call poor and thin, because there are so many straw man arguments, there are so many conflations, there are so many missed out steps of reasoning and so forth. And I'm absolutely, frankly, astonished that people like Douglas Murray can write in such praise of her, because Douglas Murray is a very erudite kind of author on similar topics, but and Helen Joyce near the end of the book mentions about what she calls crony beliefs. And I hadn't heard it put this way before, but I understand what it means, which is that people who espouse or claim certain beliefs, put them out, simply because they know that it will be popular, or they're playing to a particular audience, and it's not actually a seriously thought out belief. I mean, she may think it's seriously thought out, but I point out so many logical flaws in the things that she says, and flaws of evidence, and logical inconsistencies and fallacies and all this. And to me, this is, one point about this is that it indicates the kind of the poor level of intellectual rigor that is, being applied by many people, in who are supposedly, well placed in the public intellectual sphere, like, Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, so forth.
Yeah, they seem to be, and I can't say that I really blame them for it.
No, I know what you mean.
On one hand, because trans is
Yeah.
such a unique, people have forgotten, even in 2001, this was such an obscure,
Yeah.
way out of the range kind of subject matter. It was so far off the mainstream map, and it has kind of, I was
Mm.
watching some of your videos earlier where you're like, the precautionary principle really should be applied in, if we're going to change stuff, it should be very cautiously and slowly, and that is absolutely the opposite of what's happened. I kind of turned
mm,
around in
mm,
2018 and was like, holy hell, where did this come from? Like 20
mm,
years of,
mm, mm,
like almost no trans anything whatsoever. And then suddenly just,
mm,
the flood dams
mm.
opened and there was a barrage of it. Um,
Yeah.
so I kind of appreciate where they're coming from in terms of, the damage that this
Mm,
ideology can
mm,
inflict
mm.
on younger
Yeah.
generations is so severe and will
Mm,
is just so devastating that they kind of have to pull out all of the stops. Like they really need to stop this as quickly as possible. But
yeah.
they haven't
Yeah. Sure.
they haven't necessarily investigated to the bottom of they've just found the first culprit and gone, oh, I can stop looking now, like Kinsey money, we're
Yeah.
done. They haven't
Mm,
really scratched too far to go, well, it's still going to exist. We can't ban this out of existence. Like these
mm,
people,
mm.
like a generation and a half ago, existed outside of mainstream community in their own little, in their own little districts.
Mhm.
Sorry, I just lost my thought. They're not going to go away because, like you can just,
No. No.
they ban
Yeah.
trans medicine outright. It just is going to create a black market. So they kind of have to do
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
integrate. Like we kind of have to grapple. You're right in that we need to grapple with
Mm,
this subject matter and figure out what we think about it
mm,
and
mm.
how we can make it as in not as little disrupt things as little as possible, which also then
Yes. Yes.
throws responsibility back onto the trans community, in terms of,
Mhm.
if you're going to do this, that's fine, but you also have a responsibility to, to try and fit in as well. Like,
Yeah. Absolutely.
sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
I almost
I
lost track
well, no,
there.
I know where you're going with that because I mean, now here in Leeds, Yorkshire, there is one of the core central ideological bases. Leeds University, I think the current name is the interdisciplinary something gender studies, anyway. And I became aware of this. I mean, I kind of got caught up. I don't go into it that much in the book because it would kind of go into too much personal stuff. But I nearly got caught up in this kind of thing in the late 2000s. But it became rapidly clear to me that this was not, well, when I started going to kind of events that were where everybody was suddenly genderqueer, and I found myself being kind of out ostracized within the young lesbian, gay, and trans community around the period of 2010 because I was too normative. I just wanted to fit in society. I did not want to change the way that society viewed gender. This is the big thing, and this was what the agenda of the gender studies department is about,
Yeah.
basically. And so obviously, this is where sometime in that kind of period of time, where there were people who were strongly pushing this because these ideas don't come out of nowhere without somebody encourage them. I mean, it's very difficult to pin it down. And people say there's some billionaire trans perverts doing this and stuff, and there may well be, but the way that they, again, we're back to this whole thing about inadequate awareness of the boundaries and divisions within this.
Yeah, I kind of think, yeah, there are billionaire trans people giving money to causes. That's generally what rich people do. They give money to
Yeah,
their
yeah,
causes.
yeah.
Did you see the Jamie Reed interview, the whistleblower from the Gender Center in America? Did a trigonometry episode that was really quite telling recently.
Oh, no, I'd be very interested to see that. I kind of went off trigonometry a bit because they seem to have an endless series of interviews with Helen Joyce and Jordan Peterson and other people just saying awful things about us. So I used to watch them quite a lot, but I went off. And I keep trying to reach out to them, tweet them, everything. But these places, they never publish their email address, or if they do, they must have a million emails. So it's very difficult to get through to them. I'd love to talk to them, but so where are they at with this
Jamie
Jamie
is
Reed?
really, really interesting because I've kind of had this belief all along, that whether there's an Oz behind the curtain pulling the strings of this or not,
Uh-huh. Uh,
it kind of seems a bit far-fetched. And even if it is true, most people in the mainstream community are like, if you come at them with that, they're just going to call you crazy. They're going to think
well,
you're absolutely
exactly.
nuts. So tactically, even if it's true, tactically, it's a really bad play. Like, you're just going to push more people away than you win over. But Jamie Reed was she's married to a trans guy. She's some kind of therapist or doctor or counselor that she
Uh-huh.
was working with at-risk kids. And then she somehow found herself, she applied for and got a job working at a gender center in somewhere in America, and she was married to this trans guy, and she's like, excellent, I'm going to be helping these kids. There's going to be processes, there's going to be safeguarding, and it's all going to be great, and I'm going to do wonderful progressive leftist queer things. It's all going to be fabulous. She got there, and it slowly dawned on her over time that there was no safeguarding, that there were no, best practices. It was just a bit of if you say you're trans, no matter how old you are, and we're just going to let you do whatever you want, whether like she was talking about, parents would call up and say, I think my kid is trans, and start saying, describing their children's behavior. And Jamie would be like, no, that's just normal gender nonconformity. Like, your kid's 13.
Yeah.
Give them a wide berth. They'll probably grow out of it.
Yeah.
The parents would be like, well, what am I looking for? Just so that I know if my kid is really trans, what am I looking for? So she mistakenly told them in good faith. And then a month later, that parent would be calling up, and everything that she told them would suddenly have manifested in the light. And the interview is really interesting because it's very clear to me in that interview that here is someone who saw trans medicine from the trans narrative from an older, these people know what they're doing, they're really thinking about this before they rock up. They've spent years kind of agonizing, yes, no, maybe, yes, no, maybe, real, like, this long drawn out process. That's kind of the framework that she thought she was entering. She realized that, like, she's going along with all of this, like, just pushing kids through. And it took her a long time to actually swap from the framework, like the framework of the thinking that she had, to realizing, there's what she thought she was doing and what she was actually doing. And like, there was this horrific kind of, realization of, oh my God, what are we doing? Like, this is not, we're hurting more kids than we're helping. We're not really checking to make sure there's no safeguards. And it was actually really interesting because it kind of reinforced my view that I think that most people aren't, they're kind of coming at it from the framework, the old paradigm of, these people have thought about this for a long time, and they've been gender non-conforming for a long time and dysphoric for a long time. Like, they kind of, like, I'm losing my words a little bit, but hopefully you know what I mean. Like, they're kind of coming at it from the old paradigm of, these people have thought about this, and applying that to a new generation of people who are succumbing to peer pressure and wanting to be cool and wanting to be,
exactly,
queer and break
because
down.
it was in the 20.
Yeah.
I mean, in the 20th century, it was the complete opposite, and wasn't it, in terms of peer pressure? I mean, I myself, I detransitioned after trying to transition at the age of 20 because I simply couldn't cope with it. The thought of what people might think and everything like that. Even though I would have loved to have transitioned in an ideal world, it was just like that. I just couldn't cope with it, basically, and it probably wouldn't have been right for me, to have just kind of, gone ahead and done everything in the next year or two, because I was just too young and I was too immature. I didn't really understand my own feelings. I understood my gender dysphoria and I understood all about that, but I was also a person, and I had to kind of find out who I was in other respects and have a life,
Yeah.
which is it's kind of, they magnify something that might not be a problem at all. And I know what you're saying about where it comes from. I think to some extent it's a kind of mimetic thought virus that people who are like do-gooders, who think that they're doing the right thing. I mean, I have a relative who I've talked about this with, and I said, well, I'm very, very cautious about early transitions, and even though I suffered terribly from a skin disorder, which cured literally overnight when I got male hormone blockers. But there was also, other stuff going on as well. So, but this close relative, she said, well, shouldn't they? I mean, she presumably knows very little about it, other than the fact that a relative of hers, me, has gone through this. I would say, well, the trouble is that there is so much now. It's so much the other way around from what it was when I was young. That people are kind of falsely encouraged in it by almost like focus group mentality. And she found it, she was saying, oh, but wouldn't it be better for them? Well, there may be, I mean, I could have done with something that would have helped my skin, but the trouble is it's a slippery slope. The moment you start going down there for one person, then the triage and the assessment of young people is such a fraught subject that, and I thought, well, obviously she's not picked this up from me, because I'm very cautious about this. So I don't imagine, I mean, maybe she's been researching it on the internet, I don't know, but I mean, she's certainly not gone to Mumsnet or any of the more popular anti-trans pages. So she's obviously just got it from general, I don't know, social media or something. And it's like, well, it's you're fighting against the current when people who don't really know anything about it see a few posts from one side or the other, then their beliefs are convinced, and they won't even listen to somebody like you or I, have had lifelong experience of it going back, well past the millennium. I mean, it's very, very difficult to realize that even people who are reasonably intelligent and should be well informed actually have very little idea of what this is about. I mean, yesterday I posted a link for my book to something called GenSpect. Have you come across GenSpect? Yeah. Now, I don't really know much about them. The person who drew them to my attention said that she thought that her understanding was that they were wanting to, kind of limit the number of transitions and support people who detransition because of, this excessive kind of craziness at the moment. But I got the impression that they accepted, like Helen Joyce supposedly did, that there are people for whom it's right. You just need to have a close level of assessment, triage, and so forth. And then I got a post back from somebody saying, why are you posting stuff like that? This is all about detransition and stuff. And I thought, it's like these outlets, these blogs and these newspapers that I've written to, offering, we're back to this thing where they're unable to distinguish the differences between different sub-demographics within this. Have I published the trans umbrella item yet on my blog? Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of a bit blunt in that, but I don't know what you thought of it.
I only skimmed it, to be honest. It's
yeah.
And I've bumped into a lot of older, like people that transitioned 2000 2000, 2005, 2003, 2006, 2010, like people that have been around and they're adults when they transition, like they're well into their 20s or
Mm-hmm.
they transition, who are smart enough to realize that transsexuals or trans people transitioning existed long before this ideology hit the airwaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so therefore, they're not the same thing. Like trans
Mm,
ideology
mm,
or gender ideology, queer theory is not the same. Is not is not what trans people used in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s
mm,
as the
mm,
basic fundamental theory that they transitioned under. It just
mm.
wasn't like anywhere up to 2000, like somewhere after 2005, there's probably,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
slow stream of people that kind of believed it
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
But up until that
Yeah.
point, like people
Yeah.
rolled their eyes and laughed at the level of sheer nonsense. It was unbelievable.
Mm,
Like,
mm, mm,
but there are like if there are a number of trans adults that are 10 plus years into transition that are so emotionally triggered by the horror that is unfolding before them on social media that they can't
yeah.
separate trans from ideology, then
Mm,
I kind of forgive people for that aren't trans and have had nothing to do with the trans anything or even gay anything for forever
mm,
from not being able to do it. But there's also a practicality of we're kind of living in a populist era. Like the
yes. Yeah.
idea that there is some fundamental biological basis that, like, we don't really know why we transition exactly, like, or what causes
Mm,
dysphoria. But most people seem to be, even if they don't like it or they don't understand it, they kind of instinctively or intuitively understand that it is kind of a thing, like the
yeah.
gender
Yeah.
dysphoria is real and it has,
Mm,
it's not, I don't have any trauma background whatsoever. Transition
mm,
clearly worked for
mm,
me. Like I'm sane, I
mm,
have a career, etc., etc. Like I kind of think
mm,
the idea that which is why Jordan Peterson was a bit disappointing that that we're just going to be able to legislate everything out of existence all across the
mm,
West
mm,
is kind of a little
mm,
naive. Like,
mm. Well, that's right. And of course, then you'll find that the rest of the world will continue to have normative gender values, and you'll get small little communities like the Indian Hijra and other people living in stealth and putting up with the lower standards of care and so on and so forth. But they'll be, driven by extreme, um, conditions to do it all privately and off screen and so on and so forth, and it'll all be a great deal more troublesome for the actual real small population, even though in many ways children will be protected and so on and so forth. But it'd be kind of going back to like a almost like a kind of medieval or a fascist kind of policing of how people
yeah,
live their lives.
I'm kind of interacting with a lot of conservative. Like America is a different kettle of fish because they're Christians and their right
Yeah.
wing is somewhat more right than ours. Like Australia and England seem
Yes.
to be quite similar in a number of ways. No surprises there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but
Mm,
even dealing with like seriously conservative Christian type, people that are anti-trans ideology, even a lot of them are well aware of the fact that the idea that that there's going to be enough votes in Australia or the UK to just ban it out. Right? They seem to be there. They seem to understand that putting things back under control is probably the best they can hope for at this point. Like the idea that there's going to be some kind of revolution whereby everything can just be taken back to zero.
mm,
The cat is kind of out of
mm,
the bag. We kind of have to to negotiate and deal with it is kind of the sense that I get from, like, because I have had a fair amount to do with, right wing people that are very concerned about kids and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm,
sense that I get from them and the things that they say to me straight up is, like they kind of just want things back under control. Like they want this out of the hands of kids. They want, their
mm-hmm,
lives and their sports and their prisons back under
mm-hmm,
control. They want sensible legislation. And apart from that, they kind of realize that
mm-hmm.
the rest is probably not on the table anymore. Like,
Well, I hope not. I've just come across another book which was recommended to me. Um, and it seems to be promising, but I shan't try to be too optimistic like I was with Helen Joyce. But it's a book by a woman called Hannah Barnes. It's only been out, I think it came out in February. You
yeah.
might have come across this.
Have
And
you,
just a minute, I've got a couple of quotes from an interview she did. Where are we? Oh, hang on. Um, oh, yeah, here we are. Oh, it's gone down. She says somewhere near the end of this, it says that yes, so Barnes was more cautious. During our conversation, she stressed that there are more unknowns than knowns. So has GIDS helped some people? As far as we know, yes, it has. I've spoken to those people, so that's good. She said, has it harmed people? Yes, it has. And I've spoken to some of those people. So that looks to me like somebody who is trying to understand the situation, but realizes that it's kind of gone a bit crazy. I mean, I think there are kind of, like you said, it's a complicated kind of melange of different influences going all the way back to kind of French postmodernist ideology and Judith Butler and gradual kind of social kind of ideological movements that various people have kind of added to and concocted and things, and they've managed to, it's just kind of like people egging each other on, I think, to a large extent. And I'm so glad to see something like Hannah Barnes, not just completely saying that the Tavistock Institute was, an absolute evil, tool of, people who want to do these awful things to children. To some extent, these people kind of just got out of control, I think, didn't they? And they're kind of consumed in their own echo chamber without realizing that they've
yeah,
kind of gone over the edge.
yeah, yeah. And I think that there's a case to be made that a lot of the people that are pushing back against the Tavistock have also found themselves caught in an echo chamber of people that agree with them that is a little bit anti-reality as
Yes.
well. But yeah, so did you want to outline anything else about, because I'm actually really interested in kind of the nitty-gritty of the, like, your critique of the trans book. Was there anything that you wanted to get into specifically about that, or just
Well,
in general?
um, well, I think, well, I'm kind of thinking various different points kind of pop to the front of my mind, because it. But I mean, the overall thing is that the whole book seems to be one endless straw man conflation.
Yeah,
And also, I find there's some very condescending things, because towards the end of the book, she says, she, kind of admitting about trans women who pass, she kind of wags her finger at us and says, oh, well, we may not be able to stop you from using women's toilets, and, you might get away with it, but, really you shouldn't, naughty people. And it's a complete failure to, look at what anything else anybody has, to say about it. It's like a monograph, it's just her own particular thing. I'll just look and see if there's anything that comes up. Well, yes, I would like to say, I mean, to go back to the causes of this. Now, she's very she's very, she basically doesn't address the issue of what causes this. And as you've said, it's still under review and research and all that. But she basically completely dismisses that there might be organic underlying causes to this in development. And I think that, well, there's a case that is kind of gained a certain amount of notoriety that perhaps we should talk about, which I think she misrepresents completely. Now, you're probably familiar with the David Reimer case.
Yep.
Yeah. And obviously, that's a complete tragedy. And Dr. Money really handled it most unethically. And Dr. Milton Diamond is correct, I believe, to call it the most unethical scientific experiment in history, and it's absolutely awful. Now, having got that out of the way, there's a very sneaky. I mean, this is why I say that I think Helen Joyce is so poor on her reasoning. I simply cannot believe that she doesn't see the inconsistencies in some of the things she says, because she says that David Reimer believing he was a boy did not make him a boy. Well, I mean, clearly, that's a kind of truistic statement, isn't it? But he was brought up as a girl. He had apparently external female, genital morphology. He was, in fact, Dr. Money went to great lengths to try and persuade him he was a girl, even when, there was nothing else going on, when he was just a young child. So clearly, David Reimer had unease about his apparent sex or gender, and he realized that he was really a boy, and unfortunately he had been mutilated shortly after birth and so on and so forth. Now, Helen Joyce simply says, well, his feeling or believing that he was a boy did not make him a boy, and then she moves on as if that is the case, as if that is the argument that Dr. Milton Diamond, who wrote this definitive paper about the case, was claiming. Of course, he's not claiming that David Reimer was magically, became a boy because he believed it. David Reimer knew he was a boy because there were obviously neurological things going on inside his head, which caused him to have that belief.
Yeah.
And yet she brushes this case off, which I think is the most demonstrative of much of the, research that's been done into this. Because if you turn it round the other way, then at least it allows the logical possibility that people who felt the same way as David Reimer did might feel that for different reasons, but from the same cause, if you see the difference, what I'm saying there.
Yeah. I do see what you meant. When I was listening to the book, and she I kind of do this thing where it's like something doesn't sit right with me. I'm like, I can see what you're saying, but there's something wrong about that. Like, it took me and I kind of was thinking other things at the same time. So it took me a little while to come back and go, hold on a minute. You're kind of pretending that point reinforces your argument, but actually it kind of doesn't. Like, he's everything inside him, despite everything external and everything he's being told, is telling him he's a boy. His behavior, like all of his internal messages, is saying he's male, despite all of the rest of the world telling him, no, you're not. Like, the fact that they were lying to him is kind of a little bit irrelevant. It's not the slam dunk that she thinks it, or that she thinks it is.
No. And also, it's very interesting. Some of these arguments she makes. Now, I'm going to have to reread. There's a paragraph. There's a chapter later in the book in which I think she gets very confused about how much sexual biology contributes to the identity of the whole person. Because on the one hand, she's kind of arguing that I mean, perhaps I'm slightly paraphrasing her, but she kind of takes the, oh, it's kind of oppressive for women to have to give birth, and this shouldn't be an important part of their identity of women and stuff like that. And at the same time, she's very, very closely and tightly wedded to the idea that, we are our reproductive biology and no more. So it seems to me it's a very kind of, she hasn't properly thought out that argument, because I think she's kind of contradicting herself. Because as you obviously know, I mean, my view is that, your nervous system and your brain, like David Reimer, is more important than, your external morphology or even your reproductive capacity,
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I had some questions as to whether, like, I was a little bit unclear on your blog whether you think like the brain sex thing actually makes makes your biology irrelevant. Sorry, that's a bad way to put it. Whether
no,
whether
probably going too far, but go on, yeah.
Yeah, and then I was like, no, she's not saying that. She's saying I kind of think that, because I've had this conversation, people talk about, oh, do you have a boy brain in a girl body? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think I have a girl body and a girl brain that is somehow underdeveloped or tilted towards masculinity in a way that this is comfortable for me. Because really, when you think about it, this should not, like, transition and detransition has kind of proved this in many ways as well. Like, transitioning and having the secondary sex characteristics and the social, stepping into the social sex role of the opposite sex should be the most uncomfortable thing, unnatural thing, because your biology is written in your DNA down to like every bit of your DNA has your sex encoded in it. So it should be the most uncomfortable thing. Like, this should be the most abnormal, unnatural feeling thing that anyone can possibly do. Yet somehow it provides great relief. So clearly there's something going on, which is kind of.
I think. Yeah. So what I found myself saying now about this, because it's a kind of idea that came up while I was looking into the research, is that I don't think anything is absolutely definitive about this. However, there are lots of things that are indicative. In other words, there, like you say, that's a good word. I hope you don't mind if I use it in future. Tilted. Yeah, tilted in that direction. And you have to find the balance with that tilt. That's a good term, because balance and tilt kind of, relate to each other. And I mean, I remember as a teenager and as a young adult often saying that I didn't know how to be myself. I just didn't know how to be myself. I wasn't sure what myself was, because in a sense, I was trying to put myself, which had some kind of, inner messaging, as you put it, that wanted to be a certain way, trying to put that in a form and an expression, which I just really didn't have the capacity for. And I think there is also an interactive thing that goes on, whereby I think that I think people have an instinctive reaction, and I think that I think that a lot of trans people, they're just respected because they provoke that instinctive reaction that you're a guy. I look at you, you're a guy. You look like a guy, you behave like a guy, you talk like a guy. There may be complicated things going on underneath the skin, but it's the instinctive response that's how I perceive you. And I can understand why people sometimes get triggered and freak out when they find out that someone who passes actually is, transsexual and changed and stuff. But I think they need to get past what in that case is like a kind of indoctrinated kind of thing, that they've probably heard, all these trannies, when actually it's kind of overthinking it, that I mean, I've had several women friends who have said nice things to me about how I look or whatever. And then at a later stage, they found out I've disclosed to them because they said something about it. And I thought, I can't bottle this up any longer. And then they just freak out because I imagine it's something like cognitive dissonance, whereby their experience, their perception of me is telling them one thing. They've always thought that thing. That's how they perceive me. It's no problem. And then suddenly they find out something that intellectually, in a kind of left brain way, seems to contradict that, or at least it's kind of paradoxical. So they need to kind of get beyond the difficulty that presents to them. But then if they're willing to just recognize that they had this, instinctive kind of, gut response to start with, then that they shouldn't overthink it like this. But on the other hand, I've also had one or two who I haven't actually come out to. I have a very, very good friend, and we had a conversation once, and it came up, and I thought, oh dear, not mention anything about this. Just see how this turns out. Anyway, a few weeks later, she saw one of my video blogs, and next time I saw her, she didn't say anything until about later in the evening. And then she said, by the way, she said, I saw that video blog of you, she said, and it completely changed my whole way of thinking about this.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was really, really, that was absolutely wonderful. She's a really good person, and I'm really, really glad to have, met her. And I think that there are occasions like that in which you can, you see these trans rights activists freaking out and having tantrums on the floor and punching people and things like this. And I think it's a much more productive strategy to just wait your time and let people find out, because when people are finding out about things that are unfamiliar with them, then really it's like I did a little bit of teaching when I was younger, and one of the main things, and also being an art therapist, it's clear to me that particularly when people are coming across difficult ideas or perceptions, that they need to do it in their own time and take it gently. And this is actually what, Hannah Barnes, actually, her book, title of her book is
Time to think.
Time to Think. I think it's something like that, which I think is kind of good, because that's almost exactly what Jan Morris wrote to me when I exchanged messages with her in 1974. She said, take your time. And, I kind of rushed into it 6 months later, but then eventually, it did work out because I took my time and worked it out in my head and, understood how to do it. And I think there's so much motivation going out there, people who just don't really understand where they fit into society. And this is just a sudden quick fix solution that really has no kind of real relation to the problems.
Yeah, there's a lot of messaging about, that this will fix your problems and that you'll be a different person. And it's like, no, you take yourself everywhere. Everywhere you go, there you are. Like, you take your problems with you. And I kind of, I absolutely believe like other comorbidities need to be sorted out before you start transitioning. But there is also a like I know a few people, and I was like this as well. I was kind of on and off antidepressants and had depressive episodes right up until the point that I transitioned, and then I started transitioning, and I never had another depressive episode again. Like, well, when I got divorced, yeah, I had a massive depressive episode, but you kind of but so there's a lot of bad faith assumption about, conspiratorial theories and people, rushing youth onto transition and ignoring comorbidities, not really realizing that there's also within the community a long history of people having mental health issues, not massive, like borderline personality level stuff, but like
mm,
having
mm,
mild to moderate mental health issues that are then cured by transition,
mm,
that a lot of these therapists and endocrinologists and people that are within the trans community have seen play out over and over and over and over and over again.
mm,
So then when
mm,
the demographic kind of suddenly starts to shift after 2010, 2015, and you have like a
mm,
new
mm,
generation of people that have more
mm,
mental health comorbidities than any
mm,
generation has come before them, and less
mm,
resilience. Perhaps the doctors aren't, the medical teams and the gender teams aren't quite clued up enough. And I think they probably should be well aware of that by now. But, like this is a
mm,
complex issue and there are a lot of multi-factor
mm,
things happening simultaneously. And
mm, mm,
there are people on the trans side that want to oversimplify and just go, if you say you're trans, you're trans.
mm.
And then there are a lot of
Yeah,
people on the other
yeah,
side that are trying to oversimplify and saying there's no such thing as trans because it's just all nonsense and I
yeah,
can't make any sense of it,
yeah,
heads or tails. Like, like it kind of
yeah.
is.
Well, I with one of the people I've contacted in on through Twitter is somebody, I think it's Katie Montgomery. I don't know if you've come across her. Anyway, she's a trans rights activist. She appears to have made quite a good, successful transition medically, and yet she seems to be
Yeah.
taking a very strong view. Because when I, contacted her, I said, "Oh, you seem to have a high profile. Would you like to?" you know, could I get to know you a bit better? Maybe have a chat on Zoom or something, find out a bit more about this, have a discussion, see where you're coming from and stuff. And she just kind of like, oh, I'm pretty TRA, and and then I go back and look at her stream, and it's just an endless series of, as you say, um, respect people when they say they're trans and all this stuff without any form of assessment or investigation or challenge at all. And I find it very difficult to understand why people like that. And there's another one who I've met personally at the launch of that book on self ID that I've
Yeah.
did a video blog about. And again, it's somebody oh, I can't remember her name. She she seems to have made a reasonably good transition, passes reasonably well, but yet she's absolute hardcore gender ideologue and freaked out when I tried to suggest to her that the normal situation, of course, was male and female and everything, but that that there are variations and that we need to find out the best way to express these variations within the context of society. And she just completely freaked out at the thought that there might be kind of abstract evolutionary categories that shouldn't be deconstructed,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
she to her it would just deconstruct. So she's not even the same as Katie Montgomery. Katie Montgomery is, I mean, extreme trans rights. Anybody is trans. Then this other one is like, well, we can't deconstruct it. And there's this kind of constellation of lots of different kind of contradictory ideas coming from this trans rights area. That's not. I don't think that's actually consistent at all. A lot of it.
Well, no, when you follow them halfway down the rabbit hole, they start to fall apart. Like once you start
Mm,
questioning, like once you question any of it, like it all starts to kind of pick apart, which is like I
mm,
kind of realized that pretty early on because like my counselor was like, you've always been a man kind of stuff, and I kind of did that thing where I was like, yeah, that like that you're telling me what you think I want to hear. I'm not sure that is what I want to hear. Um, and then, like within a couple of days, it kind of just didn't sit very well with me. And then I was like, hold on a minute, I still have like a uterus. Like that's not real. Like I'm gonna have to find another way to make sense of this because
mm,
that
mm,
ain't it. Like it just isn't it. Like, yeah. So there are a lot of people that a lot of these ideas are kind of unquestionable, because as soon as you start to pick them
mm,
apart, and instead of going, okay, well, maybe they seem to do this thing where it's like, they kind of put all of their chips on that bet, rather than going, look, this exists, like it's clearly something we're going to have to fiddle around until we figure out exactly what it is, because we just frankly don't
mm,
really know. um
mm,
they kind of put all of their chips on, this is it, and then if that's not it, then the whole
mm,
bet crumbles and they lose the house, rather than
mm,
kind of going, well, it might be this, it might be that, let's kind of explore and figure out what's going on here,
mm, mm,
with the
mm,
assumption that it absolutely exists, because there are quite a number of us now, like, and there have been for quite
mm,
some time. I kind of also
mm,
think, like, the number, like, it's kind of like the Titanic iceberg thing. There's only so much sticking out of the water, and then there's like the rest of it
mm.
under the water. Like, I don't really think that people are coming into this debate now realizing how many trans people are just out quietly living their
Yeah, yeah,
lives in the
yeah,
suburbs, in
yeah, yeah,
society, doing their bit. Like
yeah,
there's a fair few of us. Like, there's a lot more than
yes,
people kind of
yeah,
realize, because I kind of
yes,
keep bumping into people like, parents that have ROGD kids, or like the parents that are freaking out a bit, and they kind of meet you and kind of have this whole moment of, oh my god, like, you're like just like a normal person, like you're actually sane, what the fuck's going on with that, like, and it's like,
yeah, yeah,
I'm not even unusual, like there are heaps and
yeah,
heaps and heaps
yeah,
of us just like
yeah,
me, but because we kind of disappear, and
yeah,
like, I don't know about
mm,
you, but a lot of the trans people that I transitioned with, or that I have been friends with over the years, like, I've called a few of them or messaged a few of them and gone, hey, have you seen this woke stuff? And most of them have no idea that the politics have changed to what they have. Like, they just have no concept whatsoever. That
what, because they're kind of out of the scene,
Yeah,
out of touch with what's going on. They don't pay attention, and
not
it's passed them by, but it's there.
Yeah, one friend was like, they keep talking about trans people like there are no older trans people, that that all these blue haired people are the only trans people they are.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Another one was like talking about, TERFs like they're just the typical toilet, feminists that pop up every 10 or so years. Like, it's just the garden variety,
yeah,
we saw it a decade ago, we'll see it in a decade again. Like, there's no difference. And I was like, no, no, dude, you need to check this out. Like, and I kind of sent him a few licks, and
yeah.
he actually, I'm not sure he actually believes me as yet that this is what's actually happening. Like, so,
Yeah.
I kind of think that there's a lot of people.
That's a very interesting perspective, because obviously, you and I see the front line on Twitter, and it's appalling. Um, there's a point you're saying about one thing that I'd like to get back to about, you're saying we don't understand this. And I'm saying, it's not definitive, but there's kind of indicative things and stuff. And it's a bit kind of fringe, perhaps, but I'm very much into the concept of cymatics. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's the science of resonance, and it's kind of on the edge of scientific thought. It's the it's the science of how standing wave patterns can be created. Like the way it was discovered was by having a musician scientist about 200 years ago found that if you bowed a metal plate that had sand on it, that depending on the frequency, you could get different patterns to be created, where the vibrations cause the sand to settle. And in fact, you might be familiar with certain kind of Indian or Buddhist uh, images called, I think they're called yantras, which have these kind of interlocking triangles and shapes. And you can actually generate some of these patterns it's a big kind of question as to how it is that the Buddhists were able to create these patterns. Presumably, they had some kind of cymatic experimental thing. But anyway, so what I'm trying to suggest about this is that, of course, Nikola Tesla probably would have been into this because, everything has kind of internal resonances and vibrations. And this brings me back to David Reimer and what you said about, what's going on inside. And of course, the brain has, electroencephalographic patterns. And there's even been some work indicating that trans people have brain patterns associated with the opposite sex. So that, it's quite a kind of out there edge kind of scientific thing. But I just think I just like kind of add it there to the mix, really, that there are obviously so many different things. There's hormonal development, different structures in the brain developing, and possible early social influences. Although it's something I think more internal, but I think we might see more in terms of cymatics. Although I kind of saw a look of perplexity on your face because
I'm really not a
bit
science person. I think I understand.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say what we do. It's part of that instinctual response, isn't it? There's been work like, Kirlian photography and, how people give off certain subtle, vibrations, pheromones, all sorts of things that cause people to feel differently about one person as opposed to another. And it's a very kind of complex and subtle, thing. But I think this is, part of the mix anyway, although it's perhaps a little bit,
I kind of
a difficult idea.
Yeah, I kind of came out this way. Like I've always been, I look different and I'm a little bit different because the hormones affect how you think and how your emotional regulation
Sure, yeah.
happens. But, I was just always this person. So I kind of tend to lean
Yeah.
towards, whether it be, my mother actually thought I was like intersexed for a fair while, like even though
Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah.
there's no evidence that that's actually the case, but she,
Yeah.
kind of told me 10 years after I transitioned that that's what she assumed when I was a kid, which kind of makes sense why she let me do the things she let me do when I was a kid. But, there's
Yeah.
no evidence of that. But yeah, I kind of think, and it's not that uncommon a story amongst trans guys that I have known of. I didn't really ever do I didn't ever really feel like I was never actually cognitively or consciously aware of it. People would tell me that I should have been born a boy, like post puberty and stuff like that. It was just
Yeah.
this sort of
That's
stuff.
very it's
That's
very interesting to hear things
you know,
like that.
you may as well tell me that I'm going to land on Mars. Like that's completely irrelevant to everything. So why bother? So I kind of tend to agree with you. I kind of think that there is some kind of hormonal internal biological driver
Mm.
as to why
Mm.
it makes why people lean this way. But I've also like my best friend when I was in year 7 and 8 in high school. I said the beginning of high school was also, like a very like she was more masculine than than I was. Um, but she was probably like she kind of went into the army, into the MP, like military police kind of army. She had a very strict family structure. Her father was a policeman, so she was like a little bit less like open-minded than I am, and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
she seems to have found her own way, even though she was probably more masculine than me. And it's not like the typical, I was a tomboy kind of stuff. It was like, no,
Mm.
that on steroids. People used to say things like, they would call me a tomboy well into my 20s, and it was a very, like it was a different level of tone altogether. It was very knowing, like it was like that plus plus plus.
Ah.
Um,
Ah.
so I kind of, like there are a lot of, I think there are people that kind of tilt this way or have those biological influences that have different personality traits that where,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of deal with their dysphoria or their incongruence in a different way and lead happy lives
Yes.
in different
Yeah.
ways,
Yeah.
which
I
is
mean, I do kind of. I mean, I, I do kind of, in some way, kind of respect people who can manage that.
yeah,
You know, um, uh, but it's just so impossible to be completely inside somebody else's head. Do I really understand what their level of dysphoria was, or how much it's just a kind of a kind of social tendency or something like that? And it's definitely a case that you can't interpret people, and if somebody makes a choice, you have to kind of go with it. I mean, thinking back to we were talking about detransitioning a minute ago, and you might have been thinking about that young chap who's, I feel he's rather being taken advantage of, actually. As you know, the one who he's
which is
been on Blair White, and I
sure.
can't remember what his name is. Is it Jules? Um, Maybe it's something else anyway, but I think you know who I mean. And I just kind of find myself wondering how it is that people get as far down the line as to have you know to have surgery, and then say that it was wrong, that it was a mistake and everything like that. It kind of baffles me how confused people can be, um, to have got that far. It's obviously one feels very sorry for him that he made this kind of mistake. But I mean, the lack of caution and care from the
Yeah,
medical people is staggering.
yeah, 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 yeah. I think that there are a number of things happening there. I like it's absolutely horrific. That goes absolutely without saying. The level of safeguarding specifically for
Mm,
those sorts of permanent, there's no turning back type surgeries has, people aren't taking it as the doctors aren't taking don't let me say this the right way. The doctors don't seem to be as cautious about this as they used to be.
yeah,
I
yeah,
also think that there is a sense now, like we're also talking about like a couple of generations later, where people kind of seem to have this expectation that everybody else is going to take responsibility for their choices. So they kind of, look into it a little bit
yeah.
less. Like
Interesting.
I know a couple
Yeah.
of trans women who are young trans women who are looking into surgeries, and they're spending like basically years looking into all
Mm,
the different
mm,
methods, weighing the pros and
mm,
cons, talking to different
mm,
surgeons, like not going like they they also have more disagreeable personalities and are somewhat more resilient as well as individuals.
mhm,
So they're kind of taking a lot more, there's a lot more caution on their behalf. Um, they seem to be taking more responsibility for the choices that they're going to make. They're
mm,
taking it upon
mm,
themselves to do the research themselves rather than expecting
mm,
the doctors to come to them with with this, with all of the dangers and the
mhm,
risks and things like that, which is something that I like with the older trans women that I know that have had genital surgery, like that's very reminiscent of what they did as well. Like they would talk
mm,
about all the ins and outs and all the details, and talk to each other about this surgeon and that surgeon and this technique and that,
mhm,
like they would go through all of the risks and the complications with each other as well. Like I think that there are
mm,
a number of dynamics that are happening. I think the safeguarding being lowered by the doctors is definitely one factor, and it is,
mhm, mm,
like it's the one of the most massive factors. But I think there's a lot of
mm.
generational stuff as well, like people,
Yes.
you know, kind of being told everything, can kind of, I don't know, there's just less resilient less resilience building in people's, it seems to be in people's upbringings now as well. Like there's,
mm, mm.
that Jonathan hates stuff
Well, I
as
think we have to, the internet has really changed a lot of this, hasn't it? I think
yeah,
that whereby people can have, online avatars where they, you know, have a, opposite sex gender identity, and it doesn't actually require doing anything. And then you can kind of live in a kind of fantasy world that, people encouraging you and everything. And then, you're kind of, almost just kind of herded down a kind of social peer group kind of acceptance level without the kind of self-examination that really should be an essential part of the whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Yeah, like that was one of the most major factors when I transitioned. Like I transitioned in 2001, which you would think being a trans guy, so knowing that I would, I kind of knew that I would look like this more or less. I knew I would pass completely,
Yeah.
because I'm also, 5'8". So
Oh, good. Yeah.
tall enough, kind of, still short, but tall enough. And even with those factors working for me, there was still a lot of fear about, you know,
Mm, mm,
how I would be accepted externally, socially. Like this
mm,
was like the worst thing you could possibly do. Like in
mm,
terms of
mm,
social acceptance, it was like, if
mm,
you were
mm.
left alone, that was a plus.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas now it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's a celebration everywhere you go. It's like,
Yeah.
is it really any wonder that people aren't thinking this through when you have, they are going to get more praise for making a snap decision and going through with it than
Yeah.
they would
Yeah.
not doing it. Like, yeah,
Yeah. Well, this Hannah Barnes has said that she's been called transphobic for writing about the, you know, uh, failure to safeguard in the Tavistock clinic. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. The just the unwillingness to look any further than an immediate kind of amygdala trigger reaction. It's not thought through at all by. And then again, this kind of just reinforces the whole kind of peer group, you know, over um, over acceptance.
yeah, yeah. I'm looking for. I've seen a few of Hannah's interviews, and I'm pretty impressed so far. She's actually at the
Mm,
BBC,
mm,
which is kind of impressive.
yes.
She's makes it even more
Well,
impressive
yes.
that she's
Exactly.
that she's.
Exactly.
I kind of think it's kind of unfortunate because people see things from the perspective, like from their own perspective only. So you've got these people who transitioned either young or as young teenagers or as early 20s that went through like I didn't have to do any therapy whatsoever. Like I got a green light, I went straight through. It was already um, informed consent in Sydney when I went through in 2001. So it wasn't until I got to chest surgery that I actually had to go and see a proper psychiatrist or a psychologist to get signed
Uh-huh.
off.
Yeah.
Um, but because which is kind of horrific, which is horrific, but at the same time, the social stigma kind of was was still doing a lot of that police work. So, but you have people
Mm,
now who don't really understand the history, who made the right decision
yeah.
for them, have made it work, who only see it from their perspective. They're like, listen, if we put more safeguarding in place, then you're going to make it harder for the people that this will work for, which is unacceptable. Instead of going,
Mm,
hey,
mm,
well, I like it would probably be beneficial for me to slow it down a little bit, to build a bit of resilience, to
mm,
do a bit more
mm,
therapy so that I know exactly what I'm doing as I'm
mm,
doing it. I've got a bit more time to think.
mm.
And we get to safeguard the people who, really shouldn't
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
this path. They're kind of not thinking about it in that terms. It's all oppressor oppressed, power dynamics.
mm,
Like it's
mm,
very it's so confused. It's
mm.
I'm kind of with you on that front. It's like it's kind of shocking that people are not thinking about, you know, the safeguards aren't there for the people that it works for so much as it is for, you know, the safeguards are there for the people this
Mm.
is not going to work for because, yeah, you know, knee surgery has a higher regret rate apparently, but the difference between knee surgery and this is pretty extreme. Like they're not exactly
Yes. Yeah.
the same category of regret.
No, no, no,
Uh,
no.
so it's kind of yeah, you know, it's a weird and interesting situation across the board.
Yeah, well, it sure is.
Was there anything else you wanted to say before we can do this again if you're up for it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're very
I'm
happy to,
totally up
because
for it. We can kind of organize a bit more.
yes, yeah, no, I'd love to do it again. It, it's kind of well, it's kind of like freeform jazz, isn't it? Really, kind of doing a something like this. Um,
Yeah, it works for a while.
not quite sure what you're going to get into when you start it, and then 5 minutes after you finish, you think, oh, there was that lick I wanted to play.
Yeah,
But it's important to keep on these conversations because there will be we'll be returning to some of these topics that we've raised because I think, as I've said, we're entering I think we're entering a new phase now where it's really, really ramping up, and they do want to, there are people now who are getting a lot of traction, unfortunately, talking about eradicating us basically, as if we are, cockroaches or something. I mean, it's really pretty kind of scary
yeah,
kind of projection that they're putting on us basically.
yeah. They're fine. I kind of because I do a lot of Twitter and Twitter Spaces in my spare time when I'm not at work. So
Ah,
I'm kind of engaged in this debate on a daily basis, and
yes, yeah,
I kind of spread pretty far and wide. And
yeah, good.
yeah, there are the people that are very much this has gone too far. We need to cut this off completely. They're kind of in the extreme minority,
Yeah,
and
I think so. It's very difficult because you kind of you'll kind of go into some little pond where there's kind of these creatures, and it'll sound like that's the whole world for the 10 minutes that you're there, but then you go somewhere else and there's a million people who are saying you're doing fine.
yeah, and there's also I kind of think that the majority of people like it's been what 40, 60, almost 70 years since trans medicine in the modern era. um
Mm, mm,
the average person has kind of accepted that this exists and
yeah,
is not
yeah,
really passionate one way or the other, you know, pro or
yeah,
you know what I mean? They're not really going to go out of their way one way or the other.
mm,
And there are also the generations of trans and gay people that have come before, you know, the crew that are here that are around now have done a really good job in kind of normalizing, and we're just normal people. And, like I've been
mm,
out for the
mm,
last 20 years, pretty much, everybody that has met me in a work basis or a friendship basis has absolutely known that that I'm trans. Like, I kind of think that while things are really ugly and there are a lot of people that are kind of advocating because they're really angry and they've had a lot of really ugly interchanges with with
mm.
typically trans rights activists who aren't even trans.
Well, exactly, yeah.
They seem to be advocating from a place of anger that is a little bit revengey. But we also live in a populist era where I just don't think, America is a different kettle of fish. Florida is quite scary.
Mm, mm,
But I kind of think, the rest of the world, the rest of the Western world is pretty moderate, and most people are pretty live and let live, and they may not understand, but I don't think that there are, pitchforks going to be happening anytime soon, like on this.
Well, no, I hope not. Although there are there are moves in Parliament, but then I suppose you always hear the high-profile dozen people,
Yeah.
who want to put something across and protect women from trans people and stuff like this. But um, I mean, I'd be all for a slight tightening of the Gender Recognition Act because it kind of opened the door to allowing anybody to be anything merely by claiming. And but I don't know how. I mean, I see a lot of people in my kind of social echo chamber who are kind of freaking out at what's happening at the moment with MPs talking about these kind of safeguarding for women and stuff. But I mean, it's important. I kind of don't like having to do it. I mean, people I know in my private life know that I'm trans. I don't like kind of getting out there too much on social media because of the personal kind of vitriol that it invites. But you kind of have to do it, don't you? Because otherwise they will advance, and you have to demonstrate that there is some reality, and that you're not just some green-haired person hiding behind an avatar. So I kind of, in one sense, I hate the thought of trans visibility, because we've been kind of, going on in the background quietly, since the 1950s or even earlier, perhaps. But then we are in that position where you have to kind of stand by your colours, I suppose. Otherwise, things could get worse. And I think that showing that you are just an ordinary, reasonable person is a really big, important part of this, which is why I partly make my argument case on this philosophical theory of the whole person. You shouldn't be you shouldn't be sheerly identified by one character. It's one characteristic of your body. And you have to assess the whole person. So this is where, getting back to these people that we started talking about, they're not looking at the whole person. They're looking at one isolated aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of think the more people even the most rabidly, like officially anti-trans activist, like Christian right-wing people that I have been interacting with, when they're kind of faced with people who are reasonable and willing to negotiate and willing to come to the table, like, basically they just want some safeguards, some like the sports situation sorted out, kids safeguarding to the wazoo, basically. So, until you get to 17 or 18, not really much is going to happen. Did I say prisons? Sports, and like once they get those sorts of things in place, then
yeah,
it's a different ball.
I mean, I think it is, yes, and I think that I think the sports and prisons thing is what largely have caused it to become so heated.
Yeah,
because these are such obvious abuses that you can't but wonder how on earth these things came to be in the first place. People just, I suppose, officials thinking that they're being politically correct. Political correctness is this kind of mimetic mind virus that has infected the Western world for the last 30 years. And I think people just get stuck in these kind of mindsets where they're just too afraid to question things or just to probe more deeply, because just any kind of questioning is kind of considered politically incorrect, whether it be about any different subject about which is topical or controversial.
Yeah, I kind of go a little bit even further. I think that it hasn't really occurred to them to think about it. Like, I think that they just don't. I think they're so busy seeing this bit that they haven't, that thinking that they're being nice they're being inclusive, they're being kind to trans women. They don't really
Yeah.
think about, oh, hold on a minute, what does it mean over here? Like this bit is just
Yeah.
missing,
Yeah.
which is what the Jamie
Yeah.
Reid interview was really interesting for, because it kind of
Mm,
demonstrates her realizing that this bit exists, and just kind of like at one point she's like, like I'm still deprogrammed in the interview with the guy. She's like, I'm still
fascinating.
deprogramming my own thinking because I've been
Yeah.
over here for so long that over here
Yeah.
is actually new ground. Like it's a revelation,
Yeah.
which is like, oh my God, that's really
Yeah. I shall have to check that out. That sounds really absolutely excellent. I mean, I think one of the tasks we have at the moment is joining up the dots between the different, kind of um, questioning mindsets, because the Helen Joyces and the like, they seem to have their foot in the big media,
interesting.
and it's more difficult to get in as an outsider. But if we can kind of, establish just amongst ourselves that there are people, that we're not alone, basically. I mean, that's the first step, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, I shall let you go.
yes, that's a good point to end.
Yeah, thank you so much
Um,
for doing this.
well, thank you very much for Kev. I'm really grateful. We finally
No
made it, and
worries.
I look forward to doing it again.